Hello, my name's Harrison Wardley. I am the double bass teacher from the Sichuan Conservatory of Music, Pop Academy Jazz Department. Today we're going to be looking at the jazz blues and a bass player's role when playing the jazz blues. First, we're going to be talking about a two-feel. Now, a two-feel is simply playing two notes per bar. For example, in the first bar of a jazz blues, we have the F7 chord. So, the first note that we will play will be the root note on beat 1, which will be F. And then on beat 3, we will be playing the fifth, which is a C. We will do this for all the chords within the jazz blues. Now, you may notice that in a jazz blues, sometimes there will be two chords in one bar. If this happens, you will just play the root of each chord. For example, the last two bars in a jazz blues, you have F7 for two bars, F7 for two counts, D7 for two counts, G minor 7 for two counts, and C7 for two counts. So you can see that I've just played the root for each of those. I'm now going to use my friends to demonstrate a two-feel with a band, with Jason on drums and Wang Jin on piano. Okay, here we go. A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now we've demonstrated the two-feel. Next, we're going to be looking at a walking bass line over a jazz blues form. Now, when you're starting to create your walking bass lines, I feel that the most important thing to look at first is the arpeggio of each chord. Okay, so the first chord that we have in our first bar is an F7. So I'm going to play an F7 arpeggio, which will be F, 1, A, which is the third, C, which is the fifth, and E flat, which is the dominant 7. Now, it is a good idea to practice all of the chords individually with their arpeggios. Arpeggios are a really good way to start walking bass lines because it is the clearest way that you can outline chord changes is by playing the arpeggios. Now, you can almost play a walking bass line purely using arpeggios, which I'm going to demonstrate now for practice reasons, okay? Ready? So this will be a jazz blues walking bass line only using the arpeggios of each chord. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. So that was an example of using a walking bass line purely built on arpeggios. Now, you may notice that playing something like that, it sounds okay, but it's missing some of the connecting notes that we generally like to play within a walking bass line. Now, when we're connecting these chord tones and making our lines smoother, we like to implement firstly notes from diatonic scales related to each chord. So, for example, on our F7 chord, I'll play the arpeggio first. Our chord scale that relates to this chord would be a Mixolydian scale, which I'll also play for you now. For my next walking bass example, I'm going to be using arpeggio notes with connecting diatonic chord scales and making a bass line just from this. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this bass line is sounding, we're almost there. We're almost playing like a real jazz bass player. Now the only thing that we want to add in now is some chromatic notes and passing notes. This will give your bass line more of that cool jazzy sound that we really like to play. Now the big question with chromatic notes is when to use them, how often do we use them? Now, unfortunately, there's no real quick answer for this. A lot of it is trial and error. And also, I would highly recommend transcribing the great jazz double bass players playing jazz blues, such as Ron Carter, Ray Brown, Paul Chambers, Christian McBride. Transcribing their bass lines and seeing how they are connecting chromatic notes in their bass lines. I'm going to give you a quick example of how you can use chromatic notes when connecting chords. Okay? I'm going to demonstrate the first 2 bars of the jazz blues, which is F7 to B flat 7. Okay? So, here we go. Okay, so just then I've played F, G, A flat, A, and B flat. Now, you might notice that the A flat is not in an F7 arpeggio, and it's also not in our connecting scale, which is the F Mixolydian scale. However, it still sounds good. And I think it sounds good because it's a strong idea that's leading somewhere. And it's a good place a good idea to connect 2 chromatic notes together when you're linking chords, which I've done there. You can see the use of 2 chromatic notes there. Finally, I want to demonstrate the last stage of our walking bass line with the band. I'm going to be using arpeggios in my bass line. I'm going to be using diatonic scales, and I'm also going to be using chromatic notes. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.